She didn't flinch. Not when Bruno Quaresma's hand slammed against the alley wall beside her head. Not when his 3 bodyguards fanned out behind him, blocking the only exit. While any other waitress in the district would have dropped to her knees and begged, Ana Hernandez just stood there, balancing her empty tray and looking tired. The man looming over her was Bruno Quaresma, the Don who controlled every cobblestone in this sun-scorched district. A man who buried his problems in the hills before lunch. He expected submission. He expected compliance. Instead, she shifted her weight, and in a blur of motion that defied the lazy afternoon heat, pressed the barrel of a stolen Beretta directly over his heart, and whispered 4 words that made his own men turn their guns on him. "Don't dare me, Bruno." The silence was suffocating. Bruno's smirk died on his lips as Ana slowly, deliberately, rolled up her left sleeve. There, branded into her forearm like a scar from another lifetime, was a small, jagged arrow. The mark of the tribunal. The bodyguard named Luca went pale, his weapon trembling as he redirected it from Ana's back to Bruno's head. The other 2 followed suit, their training overriding their loyalty. Because in the world beneath the world, the arrow outranked any Don. And La Freccia, the ghost, the myth, the legend they thought had died 5 years ago in Montenegro, was standing in a blood-stained apron, very much alive, with her finger on the trigger and the ancient law on her side. Bruno's world had tilted on its axis, and he couldn't understand why. His pulse hammered in his ears, drowning out the distant sounds of the market square beyond the alley. The gun against his chest was steady, too steady for a frightened waitress, but it was the red dots dancing across his torso that made his mouth go dry. His own men, his own goddamn soldiers were painting him like a target. "Luca!" His voice came out rougher than he intended, stripped of the smooth authority that usually commanded rooms. "What the hell are you doing?" Luca didn't answer immediately. The bodyguard's face had gone the color of old newspaper, sweat beading at his temples despite the shade of the alley. His Glock 19 never wavered from Bruno's center mass. Behind him, Marco and Stefano held their positions, forming a triangle of betrayal that made no tactical sense. They should be aiming at the woman. They should be cutting her down where she stood. "Lower your weapons," Bruno ordered, forcing steel back into his tone. "That's a direct command." "I can't, Don Quaresma." Luca's voice cracked on the title, and that crack told Bruno everything way to nothing at once. This wasn't mutiny. This was something worse. This was fear. Ana hadn't moved. The Beretta remained pressed against the silk of his shirt, right over the place where his heart was trying to punch through his ribcage. Her face was a mask of professional calm, the kind of expression Bruno had seen on the faces of killers who'd long since stopped counting bodies. Up close, he could see the details he'd missed when he'd cornered her, the scar tissue on her knuckles, the way her stance was too balanced for a service worker, the complete absence of panic in her dark eyes. "Your boys are smarter than you," she said softly, never breaking eye contact. "They know the rules." "What rules?" Bruno spat, his humiliation curdling into rage. "I make the rules in this district. I am the law here." "You're a Don," Ana corrected, her voice carrying the patience of a teacher addressing a particularly slow student. "You control territory. You collect tributes. You settle disputes between families." She shifted slightly, and the movement made all 3 bodyguards tense. "But you're not the tribunal. You never were." Bruno's mind raced through possibilities, trying to connect dots that refused to form a picture. The tribunal was a ghost story, something the old men whispered about in smoke-filled back rooms. His father had mentioned it once, years ago, before a bottle of grappa had loosened his tongue. An ancient council, enforcers who answered to no family, rules that predated the modern families by centuries. "The tribunal is a myth," he said. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew they sounded hollow. "Is she?" Luca's whisper cut through the tension like a blade. The bodyguard had stepped closer, though his weapon never wavered. His eyes were fixed on Anna's exposed forearm, on that jagged arrow brand that looked like it had been burned into her skin with something crude and medieval. Don Quaresma, that mark, my grandfather told me about it. Before he died, he made me swear an oath. All of us did, when we took the blood vow. If we ever saw that symbol, we were to obey without question. Obey a waitress? Bruno's laugh was bitter, desperate. She's not a waitress. Luca's gun hand trembled now, torn between trained loyalty and something older, deeper. She is the tribunal. You are just a capo. The words hit Bruno like a physical blow. Just a capo. Just a boss. Just a man who controlled 6 blocks of restaurants and gambling dens and thought himself a king. The woman in the stained apron had reduced his entire empire to a footnote with a single mark on her skin. La Freccia, Marco breathed from behind, and the name carried the weight of legend. The arrow. Santa Maria. She's supposed to be dead. I got better, Anna said dryly, and for the first time, a ghost of a smile touched her lips. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator indulging prey that had just realized it was in a cage. Now, Bruno, we're going to have a conversation about respect, about boundaries, about the protection money you think I owe you for working in your district. I could have you killed, Bruno said, but even he could hear the weakness in the threat. You could try. Anna's finger moved fractionally on the trigger, and every man in the alley froze. But your men would have to shoot through you to get to me, and even if they did, even if I went down, the law stands. Kill the tribunal, and every family in Europe comes for your blood. Your territory becomes poison. Your name becomes ash. She leaned in closer, her breath warm against his ear. So ask yourself, Don Quaresma, is pride worth extinction? The red dots on his chest burned like brands. The world exploded before Bruno could answer. The RPG hit the balcony of the building to their left, with a sound like God tearing paper. Brick and mortar became shrapnel, raining down in a cloud of ancient dust and modern violence. The shockwave slammed into the alley, throwing Bruno sideways into Anna. They went down together in a tangle of limbs, the Beretta skittering across cobblestones that suddenly ran red. Luca didn't have time to scream. A chunk of wrought iron railing, twisted into a spear by the blast, punched through his chest and pinned him to the wall behind him. His Glock clattered to the ground, unfired. Marco was down too, his leg bent at an angle that made Bruno's stomach turn. Only Stefano remained standing, blood streaming from his ears, his mouth open in a silent shout that Bruno couldn't hear over the ringing in his skull. Anna moved first. She always moved first, Bruno would later realize, while he was still trying to process the fact that someone had just fired a rocket into his district, his territory, his streets. She was already combat rolling to Luca's body, retrieving his weapon with the efficiency of a woman who'd done this 1,000 times before. Her waitress persona had evaporated like steam. What replaced it was something cold and calculated, a machine designed for survival. Move! Her hand locked around Bruno's collar, hauling him to his feet with surprising strength. They're reloading. Who? Bruno's question died as the second explosion tore through the cafe behind them. The trattoria, where he'd eaten lunch 3 times a week for 5 years, simply ceased to exist. Tables and chairs became projectiles. The beautiful stained glass window his mother had commissioned shattered into a rainbow of death. Stefano went down in the spray of debris, his body jerking like a marionette with cut strings. Anna didn't stop to check if he was alive. She was dragging Bruno toward the far end of the alley, toward what looked like a dead end of stacked wooden crates and refuse bins. Automatic gunfire stitched the walls behind them, close enough that Bruno felt the heat of the rounds passing. His legs finally remembered how to work, and he ran, his €1,000 shoes slipping on blood and broken stone. "The mark!" he gasped, his mind still struggling to catch up. "You said, the law means nothing to dead men," Anna snapped, shoving aside a crate with one hand, while keeping the Glock trained on the alley entrance with the other. Behind the refuse was an iron grate, old and rusted, but serviceable. She kicked it once, twice, and on the third strike it gave way with a tortured squeal of metal. Inside. Now. Bruno stared at the black hole leading down into the sewers. At the ladder, rung slick with things he didn't want to identify. His suit was Armani. His watch was Patek Philippe. He was Don Bruno Quaresma, and he did not crawl through sewers like a rat. A bullet took off the tip of his ear. He went through the opening so fast he nearly fell, his hand scrambling for purchase on the ladder. Anna followed immediately, pulling the grate closed above them just as a shadow fell across the entrance. She dropped a full 10 feet, landing in a crouch beside him in ankle-deep water that smelled of rot and centuries of accumulated filth. Above them, Bruno could hear voices, harsh, clipped, speaking in a dialect he didn't recognize. Not Italian, not quite Spanish. Anna pressed a finger to her lips, her eyes luminous in the thin light filtering through the grate. Her other hand still held the Glock, eye aimed at the opening above. They stood frozen in the darkness, water lapping at their legs, while footsteps crunched through the debris overhead. Someone spoke into a radio. Someone else laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Then the footsteps moved on. Anna waited another 30 seconds before she lowered the gun. In the dim light, Bruno could see her properly for the first time since the world had gone to hell. Blood streaked her face, mixing with dust to create war paint. Her apron was torn, revealing a tactical vest underneath that explained why she'd never looked quite right in her uniform. And her eyes. Christ, her eyes were the eyes of someone who'd watched cities burn. "Who were they?" Bruno demanded, his voice echoing in the tunnel. His ear throbbed where the bullet had kissed it, warm blood trickling down his neck. "The people who want us both dead," Anna said simply, already moving deeper into the darkness. "Welcome to my world, Capo. Try to keep up. If you are enjoying this story, kindly subscribe if you haven't." The tunnel system beneath the old district was a maze of Roman engineering and medieval desperation, and Anna navigated it like she'd built it herself. Bruno followed because he had no choice, his expensive shoes ruined beyond salvation, his pride in similar condition. The water grew deeper as they descended, cold enough to numb his feet, thick enough that he tried not to think about what he was wading through. After what felt like an hour but was probably 15 minutes, Anna stopped at a junction where 3 tunnels converged around a raised stone platform. She pulled herself up onto the dry ledge with the ease of a gymnast, and then extended a hand to Bruno. He ignored it, hauling himself up with a grunt that cost him more dignity than accepting her help would have. "Sit," she ordered, already stripping off what remained of her apron. "I don't take orders from the woman who just saved your life?" Anna didn't look at him as she reached into a hidden pocket of her vest and pulled out a compact first aid kit. "Sit down before you bleed out and make my day more complicated than it already is." Bruno sat. The fury that had been building since the explosion was a living thing in his chest, hot and demanding, but beneath it was something worse. Fear. Not the clean fear of a gunfight or a rival's ambush. He understood that kind of danger. This was the fear of a man who just discovered his entire understanding of the world was built on sand. Anna knelt beside him, tilting his head to examine where the bullet had clipped his ear. Her touch was impersonal, clinical. "You'll live. It's barely more than a scratch." She produced a bottle of clear liquid from the kit. "That better not be," Bruno hissed as she poured it over the wound. Fire lit up the side of his head. "Christo, don't be dramatic." She worked quickly, applying pressure with gauze, her movements precise. This close, he could see the other scars, thin white lines on her forearms, a puckered mark on her collarbone that looked like a knife wound. Her hands were steady despite everything. His were shaking. "Who the hell are you?" The question came out raw, stripped of pretense. "I told you, the tribunal." "That's not an answer." "What?" "That's a goddamn ghost story my father used to tell to scare subordinates into line." Anna sat back on her heels, regarding him with those dark, unreadable eyes. For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she rolled up her sleeve again, exposing the arrow brand fully in the dim light filtering from a grate above. "Your father was smart. The stories serve a purpose. They remind people like you that there are limits." "Limits?" Bruno laughed bitterly. "I run 6 blocks. I employ 200 men. I move 3 million euros a year through my businesses. And you're telling me I have limits?" "You're a Don," Anna said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "One of 47 in Italy alone. You squabble over territory like children fighting over toys. You make alliances, break them, and start wars over perceived slights." She traced the arrow on her forearm with one finger. "We exist to make sure those wars don't burn everything down. We are the enforcers of the old code, the laws that keep the families from destroying themselves. And this mark gives you the right to what? Point guns at legitimate businessmen?" "This mark," Anna said softly, dangerously, "gives me the right to execute any Don without trial if they threaten the balance. To walk into your home, put a bullet in your head while you sleep, and walk out knowing that not a single one of your soldiers would lift a finger to stop me. Because the law is older than your family name, older than your pride, and infinitely more permanent than your little empire." The words hung in the damp air between them. Bruno wanted to argue, to rage, to assert the dominance that had been stripped from him in that alley. But Luca's face flashed through his mind, the terror in his eyes when he'd seen that arrow, the way he'd turned his gun on his own Don without hesitation. "So why didn't you?" Bruno asked quietly. "Execute me. You had the gun to my chest. You had the right. Why am I still breathing?" Anna smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Because someone just spent a lot of money trying to kill us both. And that means someone doesn't respect the old laws anymore. Someone thinks they're bigger than the tribunal." She stood, checking the magazine in her stolen Glock. "Which means I need you alive. For now." "Lucky me." "Luck has nothing to do with it, Bruno." She offered her hand again. This time he took it. "Now let's figure out who just declared war on both of us. What do you think drives someone like Anna more? Duty to the code, or something darker she's not ready to admit? Drop your theories below. They moved through the tunnels in silence, and somewhere in the darkness between one junction and the next, Bruno's mind began pulling threads he'd buried years ago. Bedtime stories, warnings whispered by old men over grappa, the name his father would invoke when negotiations went sour and tempers ran hot. La Freccia. "Montenegro," Bruno said suddenly, his voice echoing off ancient stone. 5 years ago, the Kovic massacre." Anna's stride didn't falter, but something in her shoulders tensed. "Keep walking." "My father took a call in the middle of the night. I was 23, already running collections, thinking I understood the business." Bruno's memories were crystallizing now, details he'd dismissed as exaggeration suddenly taking on terrible clarity. He went white. Actually, white. I'd never seen him scared before. He told me the arrow had been killed in Montenegro, that an entire compound had burned to the ground, with her inside. Your father had good intelligence. Anna's voice was flat, giving nothing away. He opened a bottle of 1947 Chateau de Chem, the one he'd been saving for my wedding. We drank it that night, and he told me stories. Bruno could still taste that wine, still remember the way his father's hands had shaken as he poured. About a woman who'd walked into the Salerno family estate during a wedding and killed the Don at his own daughter's reception, who'd brokered the peace after the Romano-Castellano War by executing both heads of family in the same hour, who once cleared an entire floor of the Grand Hotel Milano without firing a single shot. Anna stopped at another junction, checking both passages before choosing left. Your father had a gift for storytelling. He said you were a myth, a boogie woman the commission invented to keep ambitious dons in line. But he also made me swear, made me take a blood oath, that if I ever saw a woman with an arrow branded on her arm, I was to give her anything she asked for and pray she left me breathing. Bruno grabbed her shoulder, forcing her to turn and face him. You're supposed to be dead. For the first time since the explosion, Anna's professional mask cracked. Something old and exhausted flickered across her face. I was. For 5 years, I was very dead. I earned it. What happened in Montenegro? I got sloppy. She shrugged off his hand and kept walking, but her voice carried echoes of something that might have been regret. The Kovic family was running guns to separatists, destabilizing half the Balkans. The commission ordered me to clean it up. I went in alone, like always. What I didn't know was that Alexander Kovac had been expecting me. He'd bought himself a mole in the tribunal. Bruno followed, drawn in despite himself. The tunnels around them seemed to press closer, as if the stone itself was listening. I killed 19 men that night, Anna continued, her voice taking on the hollow quality of someone reciting facts from a great distance. Made it all the way to Alexander's office. Put 2 in his chest, 1 in his head. Textbook clean. But his brother was waiting in the adjoining room with a flamethrower and enough C4 to level a city block. She touched her collarbone absently, that puckered scar. I went through a window, doing about 40 kilometers an hour. 3-story drop into the Adriatic. The compound exploded before I hit the water. But you survived. I washed up on a beach in Croatia with burns covering 30% of my body and a piece of rebar through my thigh. A fisherman found me, got me to a doctor who didn't ask questions. I was in a coma for 6 weeks. Anna's laugh was bitter. When I woke up, the commission had already held my funeral, declared me dead, retired the mark. I was free. So you became a waitress. Bruno couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. I became nothing, anonymous, normal. I rented an apartment. We learned to make espresso, pretended the nightmares would eventually stop. She glanced back at him, and in the dim light, her eyes were ancient. Do you know what your father's stories got wrong, Bruno? What? They made me sound like I enjoyed it. The killing, the fear, the power. She turned away. I was good at it. The best, probably. But every face I put down is still there when I close my eyes. Every widow I made, every child I orphaned to keep the peace. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. I didn't want to be the arrow anymore. I just wanted to serve coffee and go home and be nobody. Bruno understood then why his father had seemed relieved when he'd heard of her death. Not because the threat was gone, but because something that shouldn't exist, something that had to exist, had finally found peace. But here you are, he said. Here I am. Anna's hand tightened on the Glock. Because apparently, nobody gets to retire from my line of work. Do you think Anna can ever truly escape her past, or was she always destined to be pulled back into the darkness? Let us know what you think. The clock tower had been abandoned since the 70s, when the city modernized and left the old district's timepiece to rust into obsolescence. Anna led them up 7 flights of stairs, that groaned under their weight. Through a door with a lock she picked in 4 seconds, into a space that smelled of dust and pigeon shit and forgotten years. But it was dry and high, and the narrow windows offered clear sightlines to every approach. "Home sweet home," Anna muttered, dropping her vest on the floor with a metallic clank. Underneath, she wore a simple black tank top, soaked through with sewer water and sweat. Bruno tried not to notice the way it clung to her, the lean muscle of her shoulders, the constellation of scars that mapped a history of violence across her skin. He failed. She caught him looking and raised an eyebrow. "See something interesting, Capo? Just wondering how you're still alive with that many close calls on your resume." He shrugged off his ruined suit jacket, his own shirt plastered to his chest. His ear had stopped bleeding but throbbed with every heartbeat. "Talent. Luck. Spite." Anna moved to a corner where she'd apparently stashed supplies on a previous visit, a duffel bag containing clean clothes, ammunition, and a bottle of wine so cheap the label was peeling. She cracked it open without ceremony, took a long pull, and offered it to Bruno. "Pick your favorite." The wine tasted like gasoline and regret, but it was alcohol, and that's what mattered. Bruno drank deeply, feeling it burn all the way down. "What now?" "Now we figure out who's trying to kill us." Anna settled onto the floor, pulling the Glock apart for cleaning with the practiced ease of a woman who'd done it 10,000 times. That wasn't a random hit. RPGs in broad daylight, multiple shooters, military-grade coordination. Someone paid serious money. Bruno joined her on the floor, close enough that their knees almost touched in the confined space. He watched her work, the methodical way she checked each component, wiped it clean, reassembled it. Her hands never shook. "Could be the Rossi family. We had a disagreement last month about dock access. The Rossis use car bombs, not rocket launchers. Besides, they wouldn't dare touch someone with the mark." Anna's eyes flicked up to meet his. "No, this is someone who doesn't care about the old laws. Someone who wants both of us dead specifically because of what we represent." "Which is?" "The old guard. The code. The system that's kept the families from tearing Italy apart for 3 centuries." She set down the reassembled Glock and reached for the wine again. This time, when she drank, some of it ran down her chin. She wiped it away with the back of her hand, a gesture so human it made Bruno's chest tighten. Someone's trying to reshape the underworld, burn down the old structures, and build something new on the ashes. "The architect," Bruno said, the name clicking into place. "Cristo, the rumors are true." Anna's head snapped up. "You've heard of him?" Whispers. "Nothing concrete. A new player, supposedly operating out of Geneva. They say he's buying up dons like their stock options, consolidating power across borders." Bruno took the bottle back, their fingers brushing in the exchange. Neither of them pulled away immediately. "My second-in-command, Tommaso, he mentioned something last week about an offer. Anonymous. 10 million euros to fold my territory into a larger network." "And you said?" "I told him to fuck off. I'm not for sale." Bruno's jaw tightened. "You think Tommaso sold me out?" "I think the architect doesn't take no for an answer." Anna leaned back against the wall, exhaustion finally showing in the lines around her eyes. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind the crash. "And I think he knows about me. Knows I'm not really dead. Which means he has access to commission intelligence that should be impossible to breach." They sat in silence for a moment, the bottle passing between them. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky through the narrow windows in shades of blood and gold. The clock tower's mechanisms creaked above them, phantom movements of gears that no longer turned. "This is insane," Bruno said finally. "This morning, I was collecting protection money. Now, I'm hiding in a clock tower with a dead woman, covered in shit, drinking wine that tastes like paint thinner, while some ghost villain tries to erase us both." Anna laughed, a real laugh that transformed her face entirely. Welcome to my world. Your world is terrible. Yes. She met his eyes, and something electric passed between them in the fading light. But at least the company's improving. Bruno knew it was a mistake, even as he leaned closer. Knew that this woman could kill him without breaking a sweat. That she represented everything dangerous and unknowable about the world he'd thought he understood. But her lips were right there, wine-stained and curved in the ghost of that smile, and he'd already had the worst day of his life. So what was one more bad decision? "Don't," Anna whispered, but she didn't move away. "Why not?" "Because I'm the tribunal, and you're just a capo." "Right now," Bruno said, his hand finding the curve of her jaw. "I don't give a damn what we are." Her kiss tasted like cheap wine and danger. Dawn came too quickly, and spilling through the clock tower windows and illuminating the mistake they'd made somewhere between the second bottle of wine and the moment Anna had pulled him down onto the dusty floor. Bruno woke with her knife against his throat, and her body pressed against his back, every muscle coiled and ready. It took her 3 seconds to remember where she was, who he was. "Sorry," she muttered, withdrawing the blade. "Reflex. Remind me never to surprise you in the morning." Bruno sat up, his body cataloging a dozen new aches to accompany the ones from yesterday. His ear throbbed. His pride throbbed worse. Anna was already dressed, the professional mask firmly back in place, as if the night before had been a hallucination. Maybe it had been. Maybe he'd imagined the way she'd whispered his name in the darkness, the vulnerability that had cracked through her armor for those few hours. Looking at her now, cold and focused as she checked her weapons, it seemed impossible. "We need to make contact," she said without preamble. "Find out who's coordinating against us. Your second in command, Tommaso. You trust him?" Bruno wanted to say yes automatically. Tommaso had been with him for 8 years, had taken a bullet for him in Naples, had stood as godfather to his nephew. But trust was a currency that had been devalued considerably in the last 24 hours. "I did." "Good enough. We'll use him to send a message up the chain, see who bites." Anna tossed him a burner phone from her duffel. "Call him. Tell him you're alive and you need extraction. Don't mention me." The phone rang 4 times before Tommaso answered, on his voice thick with sleep or something worse. "Pronto? It's me." Silence. Then, "Bruno. Cristo, we thought... the explosion. Where are you?" "Somewhere safe. Tommy, I need you to come alone. Piazza del Mercato, the fountain. 1 hour." Bruno kept his voice steady, watching Anna's face for any sign of what she was thinking. She gave him nothing. "And Tommy?" "No one else. You understand." "Si. 1 hour. Don Bruno, thank God you're alive." The relief in Tommaso's voice sounded genuine. It probably was. That didn't mean anything anymore. They took separate routes to the market square, Anna trailing 50 meters behind, a ghost in a borrowed jacket and sunglasses. The morning crowd was already thick, housewives haggling over produce, tourists photographing the Baroque fountain, and vendors hawking everything from fresh mozzarella to counterfeit handbags. Normal life, continuing its dance while underneath the world, Bruno knew crumbled to pieces. He spotted Tommaso at the fountain, right on time. His second in command looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight, his usually immaculate appearance replaced by rumpled clothes and bloodshot eyes. When he saw Bruno, relief washed over his face so completely that Bruno felt a flicker of guilt for doubting him. "Don Quaresma." Tommaso embraced him, the traditional kiss on both cheeks. "We've been searching everywhere. The trattoria, it's gone. Your men, most of them are dead or scattered. Who did this?" "That's what I need to find out." Bruno pulled back, studying his friend's face. "The offer you mentioned last week. The one from the anonymous buyer. Did you take it? Something flickered in Tommaso's eyes. Something that might have been fear or might have been guilt. Don Quaresma, I would never... Did you take it? Bruno's voice dropped to the register he used when someone was about to lose fingers. He said you were finished, that the old ways were dead, that I could either adapt or die with you. Tommaso's words came faster now, desperate. 10 million, Bruno. 10 million for information, for access. I have 3 children, a wife, a mother with cancer. What was I supposed to do? Bruno felt it then, the cold certainty that Anna must live with every day, the knowledge that people would always choose survival over loyalty when pressed hard enough. You were supposed to be my brother. I'm sorry. Tommaso was crying now, tears cutting tracks through the stubble on his cheeks. I'm so sorry, but he's everywhere. He owns everyone. You can't fight him. Nobody can. Who is he? Bruno grabbed Tommaso's collar, pulling him close. Give me a name. But Tommaso's eyes had shifted, looking past Bruno's shoulder. His face went from grief to terror in an instant. Bruno, run! The black Mercedes came screaming into the piazza doing 70, scattering civilians like bowling pins. Bruno saw the barrel emerge from the rear window. An Uzi, matte black, already firing before his brain could process the danger. He threw himself sideways, taking Tommaso down with him as the fountain exploded in a spray of stone and water. Bullets chewed up the cobblestones where they'd been standing, stitched a line across vendor stalls, sent the crowd into screaming chaos. Anna appeared from nowhere, the Glock barking twice. The Mercedes's front tire exploded, sending the vehicle into a wild spin. She was already moving, grabbing Bruno's arm and hauling him toward the narrow alley between the butcher shop and the antiquarian bookstore. Behind them, the Mercedes slammed into a produce stand, oranges rolling across the square like bright planets. Move! Anna shoved him forward as a second vehicle, a black van, came around the corner. They tracked the phone. Go, go, go! Bruno ran, his lungs burning, Tommaso's betrayed face already fading into memory. Behind them, automatic weapons fire turned the morning market into an abattoir. And somewhere in the chaos, the architect was watching, laughing, erasing them one move at a time. They ran until the screaming faded, until the sirens converged on the market square from 3 directions, until Anna pulled them into an abandoned warehouse that smelled of motor oil and decades of rust. Bruno collapsed against a concrete pillar, his chest heaving, his entire body shaking with adrenaline crash and something darker. Rage. Pure, incandescent rage at the betrayal, at the helplessness, at watching his world disintegrate one bullet at a time. 8 years, he gasped. I trusted him for 8 years. Anna was checking their surroundings, the Glock sweeping corners with professional efficiency. Satisfied they were alone, she lowered the weapon and turned to face him. Welcome to the end of loyalty, the architect's specialty. He finds the price everyone's willing to accept, and pays it before you even know you're for sale. Tommaso had children, a family. I was his family. Bruno slammed his fist into the pillar. I'm feeling skin split, welcoming the pain because it was something concrete in a world that had become liquid. I would have died for him. That's why he sold you, because he knew you'd never understand. Anna approached slowly, the way someone might approach a wounded animal. Men like Tommaso, they don't think in terms of honor or code. They think in terms of survival. The architect offered him a life raft while your ship was sinking. Of course he took it. And what would you have done? Bruno rounded on her, blood dripping from his knuckles. If someone offered you the same deal? I'd have put a bullet in their head and taken the money anyway. Anna's smile was sharp as broken glass. But I'm not most people. I'm the thing that made most people wake up screaming. The words should have felt like a threat. Instead, They felt like the first honest thing anyone had said to him in days. Bruno laughed, a sound with no humor in it. You know what the worst part is? I have nothing left. No territory, no men, no money. The architect took everything in 24 hours. I'm not a Don anymore. I'm not even a capo. I'm just some asshole in a ruined suit hiding in a warehouse with a dead woman. You're alive, Anna said quietly. That's more than Luca can say. More than Marco or Stefano. More than the dozen civilians who got caught in that crossfire because the architect wanted to make a point. What point? That the old world is over. That men like you and institutions like mine are obsolete. That power belongs to whoever's willing to burn everything down to seize it. She holstered the Glock and moved to stand directly in front of him. So the question is, Bruno Quaresma, are you going to lie down and let him win? Or are you going to fight back? With what? Bruno spread his hands. I'm nobody now. You're the man who looked me in the eye with a gun to your chest and didn't flinch. The man who ran through fire with me instead of throwing me to the wolves to save himself. The man who kissed me last night like I was a woman instead of a weapon. Anna's voice softened fractionally. That's not nobody. That's someone worth building an empire around. Bruno studied her face, looking for the manipulation, the angle. But all he saw was exhaustion that matched his own, and something that might have been respect. Why do you care? You said it yourself. I'm just a capo. You could walk away right now, disappear back into whatever civilian life you built. Let me and the architect kill each other while you serve espresso and pretend the nightmares will stop. Because it won't stop. Anna's jaw tightened. The architect won't stop with you, or the commission, or any single family. He wants to remake the entire underworld in his image, and that image doesn't include rules or codes or any pretense of honor. It's just money and violence and power for its own sake. The world that replaces the one I enforced, it'll be so much worse. So, this is about protecting the system. No. She reached up, touching the place where his ear was still healing. The gesture was tender, at odds with everything she represented. This is about protecting the possibility that men can be more than monsters, that there can be rules, even in darkness. That honor might mean something, even if it's just the honor among thieves. Bruno caught her wrist, holding it gently. If I do this, if I fight back, reclaim my territory, go to war with the architect, I need to know you're with me. Not as the tribunal, not as La Freccia, as Anna. And what do you offer in return? Everything I am, everything I'll become. Bruno's voice was steady now, the shaking gone, replaced by something forged in the fire of the last 2 days. I pledge to you, not to the mark, not to the commission, but to you, that if I rebuild, I'll do it with honor. No extortion of waitresses, no civilian casualties, no betrayals. I'll be the Don my father should have been instead of the one he was. Anna searched his face for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. Okay, Bruno, I'll help you take back your throne. But when this is over, or when the architect is dead and buried, you get to disappear. For real this time. No tribunal, no commission, no calls in the night. Bruno pulled her close, their foreheads touching. You get your coffee shop, and your anonymity, and your peace. Deal. She kissed him once, brief and fierce. Now let's go kill a god. The Villa Constantina sat on a hill overlooking the city like a jeweled crown, its Baroque excess a monument to wealth accumulated through 3 centuries of bloodshed. Tonight, it hosted the meeting that would reshape the Italian underworld. 12 families, their dons gathered in the grand ballroom to witness the architect claim dominion over everything their fathers and grandfathers had built. Bruno and Anna approached from the east, through vineyards that had been tended since the Renaissance, Well, she moved like smoke through the rows, her borrowed tactical gear making her nearly invisible in the darkness. Bruno followed, trading his ruined Armani for combat blacks that made him feel like an imposter. But the Beretta in his hand felt right. Vengeance felt right. 2 guards at the servants' entrance, Anna whispered, her voice crackling through the earpiece she'd procured from a contact who'd ask no questions. I'll take left, you take right. Quiet. They moved in sync, a dance they'd perfected over 2 days of war. Bruno's guard went down with a suppressed shot to the head, professional and clean. Anna's died without a sound, her knife work efficient as surgery. They dragged the bodies into the shadows and kept moving. The villa's interior was all gilt and marble, Renaissance frescoes depicting angels and demons locked in eternal combat. How fitting. They climbed the servants' stairs, Anna counting doors until they reached the balcony level overlooking the ballroom. Through ornate railings, Bruno could see the gathering below. 12 Dons, the most powerful men in Italy, seated at a circular table. His territory, what had been his territory, was represented by Tommaso, who sat with his head bowed like a penitent in church. And at the head of the table, in a chair that looked more throne than seat, sat the architect. He was younger than Bruno expected. 40, maybe 45, with the kind of face that belonged in a corporate boardroom rather than a criminal empire. Expensive suit, no visible weapons, dark hair graying at the temples. He looked like someone who sold hedge funds, not souls. So it's a gentleman, the architect was saying, his voice carrying easily through the Baroque acoustics. Tonight we bury the past, the commission, the tribunal, the codes that have strangled progress for generations. All of it ends here. What rises in its place is an organization built on efficiency, on profit, on the understanding that sentiment is the enemy of success. Megalomaniacal asshole, Anna breathed beside Bruno. She was assembling a sniper rifle with practiced speed, each piece clicking into place. On my signal. I take him, you take the floor. Anyone who raises a weapon is fair game. Half these men I've known my entire life. Then they should have chosen better. Anna chambered around. 3, 2. She didn't get to 1. The chandelier exploded above the table, raining crystal and chaos. Anna's rifle barked once, twice, and 3 times. Not at the architect, but at the hidden positions where his snipers were stationed. Bodies fell from the upper galleries like broken angels. Bruno vaulted the balcony railing, dropping 15 feet to land on the table itself, his boots crushing fine china as he brought his Beretta up. "Evening, gentlemen," he announced. "Miss me?" The room erupted. The architect's guards emerged from behind curtains, from doorways, from shadows Bruno hadn't known existed. At least 20 armed men, all converging on the table. But Anna was already moving along the balcony, her rifle singing its deadly song. She moved like water, like smoke, like the legend she'd been. Each shot was a death sentence delivered with surgical precision. Bruno dove off the table as bullets chewed through where he'd been standing. He rolled, came up firing, or dropped a guard in an expensive suit. The Dons were scattering, some diving for cover, others pulling weapons of their own. Tommaso was screaming something, maybe apologies, maybe prayers. Bruno put a round through his shoulder. Not a kill shot, but close enough to send a message. The architect hadn't moved from his throne. He sat watching the carnage with the expression of a man observing a mildly interesting chess game. That composure shattered when Anna dropped from the balcony like an avenging angel, landing in a crouch 10 feet from him. "Hello, dead woman," he said. "I've been expecting you." "Then you know how this ends." Anna's rifle was aimed at his heart. "Do I?" The architect smiled. "You're outnumbered, outgunned, fighting for a world that's already gone. The code you protected, it died with you in Montenegro. I'm just collecting the ashes." "Then let me remind you," Anna said, rolling up her sleeve to reveal the arrow brand. Why, they called me the Arrow. She pulled the trigger. The bullet caught him in the chest, dead center. The architect looked down at the spreading red bloom with something like surprise. Then he laughed, blood bubbling between his teeth. Bulletproof vest. Did you really think? Bruno's shot took him in the head. The architect's skull snapped back, his expensive throne suddenly a very expensive coffin. The sound of his body hitting marble echoed through the sudden silence. Around the room, weapons lowered. The remaining guards looked at each other, at the bodies, at Anna's revealed mark. One by one, they dropped their guns and stepped back. The old law, written in blood and terror, still held weight in the end. And Anna turned to face the surviving Dons, her rifle lowered but ready. Gentlemen, the tribunal is adjourned. Go home. Rebuild. Remember what happens when you forget the rules. They went. Even Tommaso, clutching his bleeding shoulder, stumbled toward the exit without looking back. When the room was empty save for the dead, Bruno moved to Anna's side. Is it over? For now. She was already field stripping the rifle, her hand steady despite the violence. Until the next person decides they're bigger than the system. And you'll be there to stop them? Anna looked at him, really looked at him, and smiled that dangerous smile. No. That's your job now, Don Quaresma. I'm retired. Again. For real this time. Sure you are, Bruno said, but he was smiling too. 7 days after the Villa Constantina, Bruno Quaresma walked streets that knew his name again. The vendors nodded as he passed. The shopkeepers smiled. Young men in expensive suits trailed at a respectful distance, his new bodyguards chosen not for their loyalty to money, but for their adherence to a code he was still learning to live by. The district had a new dawn, and this time he would be different. He had to be. The rebuilding had been swift. Tommaso's assets, seized. The families that had sided with the architect, brought to heel or eliminated. The ones who remembered the old ways, welcomed back into the fold. Bruno had spent 72 hours in endless meetings, negotiations that felt more like confessions, restructuring an empire that would run on something other than pure intimidation. It was exhausting. It was necessary. It was what he'd promised her. The Trattoria Vecchia was already under reconstruction, scaffolding covering the blast damage like steel bandages. But the front entrance was open, and inside, Bruno could see workers restoring the beautiful stained glass his mother had commissioned. It would be whole again. Everything would be whole again, given time. He pushed through the door, breathing in the smell of fresh plaster and espresso. The owner, an old man named Giuseppe, who'd run the place since before Bruno was born, looked up from behind the temporary counter and smiled. Don Quaresma. Welcome, welcome. I was hoping you'd come. Giuseppe's hands shook slightly as he gestured around the space. The repairs, they're coming along. Another month, maybe 2, and we'll be beautiful again. Better than before. I'm glad, Giuseppe. Send me the bill. Saw all of it. Bruno moved deeper into the restaurant, his eyes scanning the familiar space made unfamiliar by destruction and renewal. The waitress who worked here. Anna. Is she around? Something flickered across Giuseppe's weathered face. Sadness, maybe. Or understanding. Ah. No, Don Quaresma. She left 3 days ago. Gave her notice very professionally. Said she was moving to the coast. Didn't even ask for final pay. He reached beneath the counter and pulled out a folded white apron, stained with coffee and years of service. She left this. Said if you came asking, I should give it to you. Bruno took the apron with hands that weren't quite steady. It was heavier than it should be, weighted with something tucked into the pocket. He reached in and pulled out a single card, plain white, with words written in handwriting he'd watched fill out drink orders 100 times before he knew what those hands were capable of. Don't make me come back. That was all. No signature, no forwarding address, no promise to keep in touch or see him again. Just a warning, wrapped in a threat, wrapped in something that might have been affection. It was the most Anna thing he could imagine, and despite everything, the bodies, the betrayals, the war they'd fought together, Bruno smiled. Don Quaresma! Giuseppe was watching him with concern. Are you all right? I'm fine. Bruno folded the note carefully and tucked it into his jacket pocket over his heart. Actually, Giuseppe, I'm better than fine. Can you make me an espresso? The way she used to make it. Extra bitter. Of course, of course. The old man bustled to the machine, on his movements the practiced choreography of decades. You know, she was a strange one, that Anna. Never talked much, never smiled. But she made the best coffee in the district, and she never took any trouble from anyone. I remember one time some young punk tried to grab her. This was maybe 2 months ago, and she had him on the floor, with his arm behind his back before he could blink. I thought for sure she'd been in the military or something. Or something, Bruno agreed quietly. The espresso was perfect, bitter and strong, and exactly the way he remembered. He stood at the temporary counter, drinking it slowly, looking out at the street where everything had changed, where a waitress had become an enforcer, had become a ghost again, where a Don had died and been reborn as something that might, with time and effort, become a man worth the title. His phone buzzed, messages from lieutenants, from accountants, from the 100 demands of running an empire. But Bruno ignored them for another moment, savoring the coffee and the memory of a woman who'd saved his life and taught him that power without honor was just violence wearing a crown. Somewhere out there, Anna was drinking coffee at a seaside cafe, watching tourists, and living the anonymous life she'd earned twice over. She was nobody. She was nothing. She was free. And Bruno would make damn sure she stayed that way. He finished the espresso, set the cup down with the decisive click of a man making a choice, and turned to Giuseppe. When this place reopens, I want a table reserved. Permanently. The corner, one by the window where she used to take her breaks. Nobody sits there. Ever. Understood? Si, the Don Quaresma. It will be done. Bruno walked back out into the sunlight, his new bodyguards falling into step behind him. The district stretched before him, broken but healing, violent but bound by rules that might mean something now. He had work to do, an empire to rebuild, a code to enforce, a promise to keep. And somewhere in the back of his mind, always, the memory of a gun pressed to his heart, and a voice whispering 4 words that had changed everything. Don't dare me, Bruno. He wouldn't. Not ever again. The moral woven through this tale is simple but sharp. True power isn't about control. It's about the choice to wield authority with honor, even when no one's watching. Bruno learned that fear makes subjects, but integrity makes leaders. And sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who chooses mercy when they could choose violence. Anna embodied this lesson. She had the mark, the right to execute without question, yet she used that power sparingly, reserving it for those who threatened the balance. In the end, the code survived, not because it was enforced by fear, but because someone believed it was worth dying for, and worth living by.